people come trickle in, Vin and Bang, I'll ask that you let them in.
Sure.
Awesome.
I just put my email on the chat box in case at some point afterwards you'd like to keep in touch and stuff.
Yeah, and please do. All right, Judy, I'm going to introduce you. So everyone, we're just going to get right on started over here. I want to introduce you to my friend Judy. Judy and I have worked together on, I don't know, like 4, 5, 18 seminars now. Feels like I've known you for so long. Judy is the CEO and leadership Sherpa of Dream Bridge Partners, which is a cross-cultural leadership training and consulting firm focused on galvanizing your best self, belonging, and collaboration, and a lot of other things that are super important. And you're going to hear straight from Judy, so you don't need me to filter and paraphrase for her. And like I've said, I've attended many of Judy's sessions. And to be honest, every single time I'm coming out of her sessions and her workshop seminars, I feel so quote unquote woke, as the young kids say. She is a fireball of a person. She lights a fire in me. And to be honest, my goal for everyone in this session today is just to leave feeling energized and also equipped with knowledge of what AAPIs have to work with in terms of barriers to success. So I don't want to keep everyone waiting. And Judy, I'll pass it off to you. And I made you a co-host so you can share your screen whenever you need.
Fabulous. All right. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Let me just kind of quickly, before I share, one of the funny things I have, ever since I lived in COVID world, I now have like literally 3 screens, and you never know exactly which screen is going to show up on. There we go. See, it already happened. Give me one quick second, and then I can figure out which one you're going to be on. All right, so that's already moved over here. So I'm going to move this over to the right screen.
I feel like you're so much more tech savvy than I am. I would just like mess up.
I don't know about that. It's just, it's part of the job. But the weird thing with this, I still can't, is it shows up differently for Zoom almost every time. So then I'm always still trying to figure out which screen to share. All right. So hopefully you're seeing the PowerPoint at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. All right, great. All right, I'm just now going to make sure I can see all of you here. Fabulous. Okay. All right. So let's get started. Harris is just really, truly kind in terms of, talking about the work that I do and so on and so forth. And a lot of it really, I think, is born out of my experience, and then now having had a chance to literally coach thousands of professionals of color, Asians among them, but also African Americans, Latinx individuals, is really just seeing a lot of the lag, the gap that I think has been present, unfortunately, since Asians have been in the United States. And I think for me also, as an immigrant, I came to the States when I was 6, grew up in New York City. My parents are from China originally. And then kind of realized we're actually refugees, right, to Taiwan when the communists took over. And so we live that first generation immigrant life. And so I've all had my, what is the first phase of my career, which was everything was about like, making sure you're top of the house and everything, and did that through my 30s. And then had, major infertility issues and decided to jump off the corporate track. And because of that, actually started my own leadership consulting firm that I've had for 15 years now. And I say sometimes you have to really hit the wall to figure out what you love. And so I'm lucky enough that I'm doing the work that I really love to do. It's my calling. And as they say, if you can be lucky enough to find work that you would do without ever being paid, this is it, right? So I'm one of the lucky ones. But it's also been a lot of work, especially given our Asian background, to do what I wanted to do versus what I really thought that I was supposed to do. So it's been a work in progress. But without going to that too much more, but that all brings me to this moment, right? Which is having all of us and all of us kind of different generations kind of lean into this moment and say, we've got to do something differently. And the United States has to reflect us differently than what has been. It's just simply unacceptable. So what I'm going to do is give you a quick feed of the Asian American history. I really woke up to this when I was an undergrad, and alums on the side really were teaching Asian American history because Harvard still doesn't have ethnic studies. What a surprise. But back then they really had nothing, right? And so it was actually alums that came back and educated us about Asian American history. And then giving some real numbers about where the Asian situation is in terms of our career advancement. And then giving you really what I call the career advancement GPS that I call for historical power culture outsiders. Gives you a quick frame to start thinking about what are the challenges that I'm seeing consistently with people of color, but especially also Asians. We are not an exception to that rule, although some people do think that, and I think it's an unfortunate internal oppression that we like to believe that we are white, but we are not. You'll see all the numbers why we're not. And then the question then is, what is the NAP kind of leadership role that you want to take for your own constituencies and your own communities, and then also really at the national stage for Asian Americans in general. So in Harrison, we're talking about this, that we would have, my talking for a period of time. And Harris, are you still good with thinking about doing breakout rooms? And we'll have time for that, and then Q&A. What's your
Yeah,
thought?
I think we'll skip the breakout rooms. We'll go into Q&A and doing a poll.
Okay, sounds great. All right, so I'll take your lead after I'm done. Okay, great. So, all right. So, quick thing is, I my background is in consumer packaged goods, so there's something in the power about understanding the brand, right? And my perspective is, the Asian brand is invisible exclusion. We have always been excluded, except we're consistently invisible, so that we're really not heard, right? And so the invisibility stays through a period of time, and people think that we're still new immigrants, when in fact we came in the 1800s, right? And so most of you may know this. If not, I'm just going to do a quick history of where we've been and where we are today. Is that Chinese immigration actually started, one of the first ones to come in from Asian background in the mid 1800s, due in part to the Emancipation Proclamation. Frederick Douglass was actually really supporting the Asian situation. So from the very beginning, the Black community was actually supporting Asians in terms of our equality. And so, but by 1882, when Asians had come in and really kind of established a foothold and started to do fairly well, the Exclusion Act happened, right? So then no more Chinese or Asians could come in. You couldn't even bring families in anyway. And so it was all these laborers that couldn't progenate, could not create generations, right, of people that looked like us in the United States. And so that's why we still look like we're new, when in fact we're been here since the 1800s, but a very conscious reason that was instituted by basically white power to make sure that people that looked like us didn't have a history in the United States. And so, not surprisingly, therefore, in the 1940s, during World War II, while there were Germans and Italians in the United States who were part of the Axis, it was only the Japanese that were interned, right? And property seized, may have been here generations and all wiped out. And then of course redistributed, so on and so forth, in places where there are few of them. And we also start understanding what isolation looks like for those individuals during that period of time. And so again, why were the Asians and the Japanese singled out? Why were the others not? And why to this day are we still not really acknowledging the damage done and the generational damage done to that population, right? So here we are, excluded, invisible on the other hand, right? It's not really in history books about either of these two things. And then we come into, many of us, for example, my family benefited from the 1965 Immigration Act because really of the Civil Rights Movement, right? And the Voting Rights Act in the mid 60s that really opened the door to the first really vast non-white immigration in the United States. So that's really new if you think about it. It's only been about 50 years that people like us of different skin colors, so on and so forth, all coming to the United States at rapid pace, at large numbers. And so we would like to think as Asians that, in these 83 years, we've done actually quite well. And for those of us that happen to be here, part of the NAP leadership, we're like, hey, we're doing cool, right? Look at us, we're so educated, right? We're like 54% of us have college education, and we really get to the sense that we're moving forward. And yes, I guess we are, right? The issue, however, is that I always talk about equity. Given the knowledge that we have, given the experiences that we have, given what we contribute to the organizations in the United States, are we getting fair share of equity, of dollars, of all those aspects of capital that builds wealth over generations, right? The answer is, of course, no. So here's some data for you to look at that if you haven't seen it, it kind of hold on to your seat and get ready to either get pissed, nauseous, or I don't know what. So what this shows you is we are actually Asians the worst off in terms of advancement. Because when you look at professionals in most of the organizations that we're in, you have to have a college education. So you can't look at it as a broad general population as the denominator upon which we're looking. You have to look at, based on people that have college education or based on those that are already professionals, how do we get advanced? How many of us are managers? How many of us are actually executives? And when you look at from that kind of angle, which we never look at the United States, right? We are doing the worst off. So what this shows, the MPI, thanks to Buck G, who's done a lot of this analysis, first starting in Silicon Valley and now nationally, is this shows basically our index of management. So it's the percent of people who are considered as managers over the percent of that particular population that also are professionals, right? And I circle the purple, and it just looks at how significantly worse we are relative to all other races when you start looking at that particular population that we have to look at if we're looking at corporate America, nonprofit organizations that hire based on education, right? So this is really, again, for you to really understand what that means. And if we're not getting advanced over 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, think about over time what I consider compounded annual growth rate of our salaries, of our dollars, of all of that, especially given the education that we have. It's enough to just make you not very happy. That's the best way I can talk about it. All right. So, and galvanizes us that we have to do something. So if you think this is bad, the executive numbers are even worse, right? And so this is actually, so same denominator, but now you're looking at people who are actually executives. And Asians are doing significantly worse. And Asian women, I'm glad we all got that education, but most of us are way, 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 way below where we could be, both in terms of, I always, the work I do is about best self, expressing our best selves, getting out there, doing what we can to contribute to the world, and importantly, getting equitably rewarded based on that. So we're really second wind at that for Asian women. And Asian men are not doing great at all, right? Relative to other groups here. And so I think for all of you, just to kind of understand that, recognize that. And I do a lot of D&I work around major organizations. And the issue that we have as Asians is that what they always look at is general representation as opposed to advancement, right? Most organizations are not looking at rate of advancement of different groups of people, because the issue largely when you look at people of color is there aren't enough Blacks and Latinxes in organizations. And you Asians are fine because we see a lot of you relative to your population. But when you look at this, the relative base that you should be looking at, and especially advancement rate, this is really where it's just so significantly concerning for all of us. And of course, rather than dividing all of us nowadays, people calling Black and brown folks, which I'm like, yo, what are we, right? So the Black and brown is another divisive tool that's being used to kind of put us in different places. At the end of the day, we are just not really doing well equitably, right? And the only group that's really benefiting, especially when you look at them being advanced, is our white men. They're the only one that's truly over-indexed, right? Over 1 and 1.8, which means that when anyone says to you, you know what, I believe in a meritocracy. I think the best person should be getting up there. And there's a question every time a Black or Latinx person comes and says, gosh, I wonder if they're really qualified. I say it's completely bum, because if you're so over-indexed to be management and executives based on your population, you can't possibly all have the best, or everyone else must be so severely under-capable that you have to have more white men to represent us in management and executives. So a lot of us are rethinking about the arguments that are being put in front of us, and to really recast the assumptions that are underneath who seems to be qualified, who gets forward, and so on and so forth, right? Okay, so in addition to a lot of this is for you to start thinking about why. And I do a lot of cross-cultural work and advancement work. And one of the biggest issues for us as Asians, and particularly East Asians, because South Asians have a slightly different normative in their culture, but among East Asians, especially those that come from Confucius cultures, really have a phenomenon of dealing with visibility. Because we in Confuciusly raised cultures are all about hierarchy, authoritative, not having a voice unless you've reached a certain point in life that you now can have the voice. And South Asians, while there is hierarchy and they had a caste system, but there's a different aspect of the voice. They are the largest democracy. So this notion of being able to have a voice is very different for the East Asians and South Asians. So then what here specifically what you're looking at, this is based on Hofstede's work, and this is actually GlobeSmart, and it looks at the diametrically different ways that we come to look at this notion of independence, having a voice for the self, having a voice for the group, or power distance, whether or not I think I'm an equal as a human being to my CEO, senior vice president, executive director, versus other countries, Asian countries where, if there's a senior person sitting there, we just kind of go quiet. And that's been brought up in our homes, and that gets replicated in education, gets replicated again out in corporate world or just organizations in general. And so what happens is these two really important things that drive leadership in the United States, because US leadership is all about visibility, having point of view, having enough voice literally out there and pushing things forward, which is really diametrically opposed to the we cultures that that all Asians come from. And so when you look at countries around the world, East Asian culture has the biggest gap relative to US culture. And so for all of us to recognize, first of all, we're perfect, we're fine. I love the fact that I am Chinese. Parts of it I can deal with, some of the other stuff, I won't go into that right now. But my point here is we have to fully accept who we are, and the fact we are absolutely full, and there's enough of us at this point, right? But if we want to get into leadership in a US construct based on a white male, we are going to have to shift. We're going to have to shift out of our comfort zone into a zone that really most of us have brought up to not do if you're going to be a respectable person. And so that's a real rub for many of us as Asians. How do we get that visibility in the United States? Because the very thing that is expected, which is voice, is the very thing we've been asked and brought up to really be very, very judicious about whether we voice or not, especially Asian women, especially in public. We voice a lot at home, but once we go out the door, right? I mean, traditionally our voices get silent. And so, and this is why some of the advancement numbers for Asian women are the worst among US populations. So there's a cultural reason for that. And I think the most important thing about when I work with the best self is let us not think that we're not enough. And let us recognize that it simply happens to be a European American male culture that is defining leadership in the United States. And therefore, if we want to be part of that game, there's a part of us that does need to shift, right? But that's not a lack. It's just the fact that we have to move from a we perspective into a me perspective, and live between those two worlds. And the reason that the advancement particularly is challenging for us is that if you look at how many of us are raised, it's about getting the A's, doing really well, keep your nose down, just work hard. And then if you do work hard enough and you get the great grades, you get to the great schools and you get to your graduate school and you do all these different things, you can get rewarded for it. I said, absolutely, you will get hired. You will absolutely get hired. And you'll probably do really well in the first 5 years and then get ready to plateau for the rest of your career, right? So that's our return on investment for all of our time, all of our education. Because why? If you look at what happens to people over time in organizations, and for me, I do a lot of C-suite coaching and up and coming professional of color getting into executive roles. And so I'm really helping them kind of move into that big, big orange bar. So we go from doing the work, which is about reports, and we're not talking or putting things forward. And then as we get more and more senior in organizations, your actual voice, storytelling becomes the number one thing you've got to be able to do if you're going to get recognized. And the second most important thing that also is part of that cultural gap is the fact that you've got to make friends with people in power, like make friends with them, right? So the reason I ended up getting to be the youngest vice president at Polaroid is the fact that I actually had an amazing insider, white guy, that kind of said to me, Judy, you're nailing the P&L. You're killing it. But the executive committee doesn't really know you. They don't know you well enough. And he literally coached me how to literally do the song and dance and do the cocktail hour and meet people so I could make the senior leadership more comfortable with me. And it's only because of that reason that he actually coached me that I got to be promoted at that quick pace, right? I could have just sat there and done my job and killed the P&L some more, and that wouldn't have gotten me into the executive level. And so we have to really begin to understand that if we think that working hard is what it is, we are completely missing the boat on what it is that actually pays back an ROI from a US leadership perspective, right? And so the question is, yes, I would love for white males moving towards us. I'm doing a lot of that work in D&I and organizations, but that's going to be, however many years. And like it or not, right now, unless we Asians step up and do something, Black and brown, which do not mean Asians, are the ones at the top of that D&I work. And unfortunately, more and more organizations are beginning to leave out the Asian part of that formula. And so if you're out there in NAP, you're there in your leadership, working with your communities, you've got to get people to really wake up, get into the organization and say, when you say Black and brown, you're including me, right? And if not, we've got to sit down and understand what racist tendencies are going on there, right? We've got to speak up, because this time is going to move and all the money is going to move away from the Asian population based on what I'm projecting is happening in organization in the United States right now. Okay. So let me kind of just quickly go into, I always like to have solutions, right? So one of the four things that I talk about, and I have this called the GPS, because I think we really do need to have, a way of figuring out how to navigate this landscape that's maybe new for us, especially for first generation. And even I've coached someone who's a fourth generation, right? Family from Hawaii and then California. And she was having issues moving up one of the most senior, a big organization in Boston. And her family, everyone has been of Asian background. And she was dealing with this stuff, 4 generations having been in the United States, right? So what are these 4 things that I like for you to know and start thinking about? What does that mean for me? What does that mean for people in my organization? What does that mean for in my NAP role as a leader? Is that there are 4 things that I found to be incredibly important for growth. Is credibility. So, not only doing your work, but people know that you're one of the best. You got to be like a 7, 8, 9 out of a 1 to 10, right? For there to be credibility, but credibility isn't enough. You got to have visibility. People have to know you're one of the best, and people have to know that you can show up and do storytelling, do presentations, and be out there in organizations, and they can put you in front and some senior leaders, and you can actually pull that off, right? Because that visibility is one of the key indicators of leadership potential. Then the thing is relationships, small talk, having cocktails. I travel a lot internationally, and I don't drink, but I have to sit there in the bar with the guys and just hang out. Luckily, like Ching understands, I'm a New York City girl, so you want to curse? I'll curse right there with you. I've got no problem doing that. And because I could do that, people are like, yeah, right, she's one of us, right? And so, but if I was kind of quiet and I didn't have that personality, I probably wouldn't have made it up in corporate America as quickly, right? So we have to realize how important relationship is. And then finally is really understand we're constantly a brand do people understand that? And so, and then importantly, the rules for those who are historical power culture insiders and outsiders are different. Like they are different. I'm doing enough coaching of white people and white guys and others to understand how people get groomed, how they're getting the apprenticeship is literally different, right? Because it's about comfort. It's not actually overt racism all the time. A lot of it's just that unconscious bias we talk about. We are with people that we're comfortable with. And if you happen to be more white males or more comfortable with white males, simply because they show up similarly, right? And we come from a whole larger system and we understand has racist and sexist tendencies. So we're part of that. But my big thing about this is the fact that we should never be shamed about who we are. So this notion of third culture identity is important. And let me kind of quickly talk about what that means, which is this, is that if I come into this world as a Chinese American woman and power culture is white male, by definition, what it says to me is I'm going to have to make some modifications, right? But one of the biggest reasons when I'm actually coaching people that people don't want to change, like, no, but I'm who I am. And if I'm who I am and I respect that, I'm not going to move into that because that's their game. And I said, well, that's true. But if you are in this place and you want to get promoted, you can make a choice about how you want to deal with that. And my perspective is we have multiple identities all the time, right? I've got my city girl going on all the time, and I've got my really polite Chinese speaking person that's also within me. And so all of these identities are constantly within my choice of what I want to express. And so we have to be open to saying that we have multiple identities. Is the only way to authenticity for people of color. We can't be that. People say, oh, so what's that authentic you? And I said, let me show you all the versions of me that make me authentic, because I'm living in this world as a third culture person. So that means for a lot of you is getting more comfortable saying, oh, so that's my corporate self, but I'm going to own that. They're not making me be that. I'm going to go out there and voice myself. I'm going to have a point of view. I'm going to make friends with different kinds of people because I allow myself to have multiple identities. And then in fact, if people think we can only have one identity, it strangles us. And it definitely doesn't give us the room that we need to really grow into who we really can be. My kids are triracial. They're Chinese, white, and Black. And I can tell you that they're come from all those different places. And so I've had a social experiment. So my point was, you can be anyone you want, and it doesn't matter what anybody tells you because they are not who you are. And so they are comfortable literally being, Chinese. We're going Lunar New Year pretty soon. We do Passover, we do Christmas, so they're going to private schools. And so my point is, nobody defines who you are, only you do. And they have a lot of latitude about where they can go, right? Okay, so I think there's an important part of how do we play this game without losing who we are, because that's not a choice that any of us should ever make, because we have to give up who we are. I would say it's an additive experience. But I think finally, and I want to make sure there's enough conversation here, is there are 4 key things that literally, one, I am coaching people that I talk about. This advancement formula, I make the E, education, small on purpose, because we think that's a big thing. It's like, no, I got you into the door your first 3 years, but everything else after that really doesn't matter. C is the confidence, and then it's a star. Speaking up, taking credit, advocating for yourself, and having a relationship with managers. These are 4 critical things we all have to do. So one of the biggest issues that was voice, right? The voice part is the hardest thing for most of us, having a voice. Second part is taking credit. I've done a lot of surveys. I cannot tell you how many Asian professionals will say that what they have been doing, others have taken credit, whether it's a manager or a colleague, and we politely sit there and allow somebody else to actually take the work that we've done and take it as their own, and not know exactly how to go back and say, no, that actually was mine, right? And let me tell you how that happened. And then with as advocating for self, asking for a project, asking for that next opportunity, asking for the promotion. And if it's not good enough, thank you very much, I'm gonna leave. The number of times people said to me that I was impatient was quite a lot, but also that's probably what got me to be the youngest VP at Polaroid, because I was like, your patience is not my role, and I wanna ask for what I wanna ask for. If I'm difficult, hopefully I can find a job somewhere else, right? And finally is relationship with managers, the socialization. I've always, for some reason, had a pretty good conversation ability with men in general, white men and people in power. And that kind of consultation has always helped me a lot. And I've seen that with others that have moved up who happen not to be of that background, right? So we have to really begin to understand there really is some critical factors that's going to help us be professionally successful, and at the same time that we're owning our voice. And this is exactly the same thing too in the political government realm right now, that what we're seeing in terms of having a voice, claiming what should be right for Asian Americans, making the ask of what we expect from our legislators, and then really making sure we're there with the representatives on a social basis as well. And then finally, again, pulling that into the third culture realm. So I ran through that really quickly, but I wanted to make sure I got those key points to you. And I'd like to, maybe open it up and really, Harris, have you help me facilitate this part of it, which is the question is, what can the NAP leadership undertake to address this Asian professional, both in visibility and the advancement gap? So Harris, let me invite you in, and what do you think would be the best thing to do with the 10
so
minutes
everyone in this room is a leader at NAP. Whether it's at your local level or your national level, in some way, shape, or form, you have the power to impact your community by taking on some of these challenges that Judy has mentioned. We got a lot of, Vin, for example, president of DC, We got Kim Tong over here, who's president of NAP Atlanta. You got a lot of people who have, and you have to be honest with yourself, you have the power to talk about some of these gaps. You also have the power to build these solutions. So what Judy and I are gonna do is we're gonna brainstorm, think tank here, and ask for your opinion. What do you think as a leader of NAP, what can you do to start breaking or tackling some of these challenges, these invisibility and advancement gap? So I know I see familiar faces. Sharita, I want to call on you. And after that, if anyone else wants to raise their hand to go afterwards, we want to invite you to the conversation. So Sharita, if you don't mind, you want to talk through your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you, Harris. And thank you, Judy, for that wonderful presentation as well. A lot of things come to mind as I'm thinking about this, right? And I think the first thing that, it's more of a question, but the first thing that came to mind is as we're thinking about authenticity and being our own self, where do we draw that fine line? Like, especially if you're in an industry that is predominantly white male, and we're thinking about trying to develop that social connection and mentors. But it's hard because it's like you still want to be your authentic self, but in a way you almost have to change to be able to communicate, to have more of those interpersonal connections with these people that are your senior managers. So that was kind of like my first thought as a question. And then in terms of what NAP leadership could do, the second thing that came up is this idea of speaking up. And I could already see having more formal like communication training, more webinars or some sort of workshop that allows for people to feel empowered to speak up. Because I know that's being part of the Women in NAP program. That's definitely a big issue that we're seeing right now. So those are just my initial thoughts.
Thank you, Sharita. So I'll invite anyone else who wants to come in and join the conversation. And don't be shy. I will call on you if I see you smirking on your video. Ching, why don't you come in?
Yeah, actually kind of just pulling on that thread of creating or giving people opportunities to speak up. I think part of my journey over the last several years in terms of finding my voice and being able to be comfortable with that voice is feeling safe within the environment that I'm in, and getting over the fear of saying the wrong thing or my opinion being wrong. And I think that's something that NAP can really provide. And I've really gotten that pretty that support pretty well within the Chicago chapter of providing a safe environment for us to practice speaking our voice and to expressing our voice, so that when we are in those more compromising professional settings, we don't have that fear of being wrong.
Thank you, Xing. Susan.
I just wanted to say, I think, first of all, Judy, I love your presentation because I think a lot of it is really about understanding the framework. I think a lot of us, it resonated with because you kind of know that's what happens in the workplace, but you just don't know how to put a framework around it or solutions around it. So the fact that you did that, I think is great. And now that all the leaders here they kind of have an understanding of what that is, that we can then share and communicate out to the membership, I think is a really important thing. I was kind of joking on the chat, but for real, that was my lived experience. And, the question that you asked, Sharita, about how to be authentic and still be different. And I struggled with that for, many years. I got a lot of feedback from my senior VP that she wanted me to be more aggressive. And, one of the advice she gave me at one point was, she said, well, just, push your boss aside. And I just want you to like step up and do the presentation. And I said, and I'm kind of looking at her like, what are you talking about? I would never do that. You know what I mean? So it was advice that made no sense to me. And I struggled really with kind of figuring out, okay, but you're telling me that that's the one thing I need to do to get promoted. That means you're negating all these other great things that I'm doing, and there's no value to who I am. And I struggled with that a lot. But, I had a conversation with somebody, and the way they had presented it to me was about, it's not about changing, because I think that word is hard. It's not about changing who you are. It's really about dialing up or down certain aspects of who you are to really be able to navigate that corporate environment. And that helped me sort of understand it better. I don't know if that helps anybody.
I was going to say something exactly like that. For me, I'm actually going through this right now, like trying to, network into different careers, network into a different industry that I'm currently in. And one thing that I keep hearing from all my, not coaches, but kind of mentors is change the way that you talk about yourself. Don't use words like I think, or I might be able to, or I may be. Like, tell people what you can do. Tell people who you are. And one thing that I always think of, like one quote that I always think of is, in a world full of people who tell you that you can't do something, don't be one of those people, because no one's ever going to care about your career or yourself more than you do. So just being in this presentation, hearing all those things back to me, I think is really, it's really powerful. I'm having a great time. So yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks for the presentation, Judy. That was really good. I think you're right. Especially with Asian women, we're raised to be a little more, contained, more submissive. So when you are outspoken, especially within your community, you may feel like you stand out in not the best way. So when you are in a work environment, it's different. So I like seeing the numbers. That was pretty amazing because I knew it, but I didn't, know it was that concrete. So I think you can remain your authentic self. You can stay introverted, extroverted, whatever, but I think it is a game. You have to look at it like it's a game. Do you want to get promoted? Do you want to move up? So yes, you're going to have to build those relationships because people hire people they know, they promote people they like, right? So I think for me, I have to look at it as a game because at work now, it's like there's a position that I was just told about and I could do it, but it's like, I don't really want to work with the executive director. I don't want to be in this whole political environment that I would have to be in this new role. So I think you have to decide what you want, and it stinks because it is political. And if you want to move up, you have to play the game. And I think if you want to do that, you have to learn to play it from mentors such as the people in this conference.
I mean, I would just love to say before we end is that I struggle with still, I do this work and what I struggle with is what I see many Asians continually struggle with is that we have an endemic culture from thousands of years that has basically told all of us that we're never really going to be good enough and someone tells us we're good enough. And so our entire sense of self-worth is based on how someone else pegs us, which is a horrible place to live. But that's a reality. And I can't tell you how many Asian women that I've worked with that have such a sense of self-hate. I'm not good enough for this, I'm not good enough for this. And so there's this. So in order for us to actually move forward, we have to recognize the tape that's playing. And the hard thing is when we see the tape, it's actually really, really devastating. And when we actually go out and talk, we have to go through this great crevasse and jump over this voice that says, you're so stupid. What the hell are you doing talking? Get the fuck back here. Excuse me. I'm saying this is what we say to ourselves. And don't say anything, because if you make a mistake, you are the biggest loser in the world, and just go home. And so I'm putting this so harsh out there because I've had so many people with whom I've worked, that voice is so loud that they can't get through the atmospheric break. So I want to say that, yes, absolutely. I hope that all of you will take that moment to walk through that. But it would be unfair of me to say, do it, with also saying at the same time, there's going to be some part pulling you back and really criticizing you, because I've just seen it so often, right? And so one of the biggest things here is really this practice of what I call loving kindness. how to allow ourselves to try things, to be absolutely imperfect, and not knock ourselves back down into pulp. And I think that's the part that I would say, if there's one thing I continually work on with clients who are of Asian background, it's the fact that I'm okay to be imperfect, and there is no such thing as perfection, that we have been told by others that there's something we have to strive towards. So I really want to put that out there so that we understand what the path feels like. Anyway, so nothing like, leaving on a light note, but it's possible, it's workable, it's absolutely workable. And just the path, and then the other side of it is just like, it's amazing. On the other side, it's amazing. Anyway, ownership is a great thing, but ownership takes work.
So maybe we do have time for maybe 1 or 2 more comments from the audience if you're interested. But Chrissy, you mentioned you want to go ahead and share.
Sure. Hey, everybody. Judy, thank you so much for your presentation. It's things that we all knew innately were happening, but to see data to back our thinking and beliefs actually really helps. So I just want to echo the sentiments about getting a mentor. I moved to Atlanta in 2011 and I literally didn't know anyone, but I think it's important in whatever environment you're in to survey the landscape. So figure out who are the key players, who are the influencers, and figure out how you're going to meet them, how you're going to get in front of them and get their support. I have what I like to call a personal board of directors. So I have mentors, not only of different industries, but people that I look up to, different races. Honestly, some of my strongest mentors have been Black women, because they're just so powerful and Black girl magic is real. And so I figured, how can they help me develop that Asian girl magic too? And so I have sought out mentors and have actively kept up with them. And I've just asked, how can you help me and how can I continue to climb up? Because like I said in the chat, there's not enough of us in that C-suite. I actually just left nonprofit and I'm back in corporate America because I want to be able to uplift and empower more of us, because we need to change those numbers that Judy just presented and flip it on its head. And that's why we're here in NAP. If we're going to build leaders, that's why we're here. So let's just all do it. And it starts with us. So thank you again, Judy. I appreciate the time. And thanks, Harris, for calling me out.
For sure. So we are out of time. I hope everyone was excited, and I told you were going to get woke. I wasn't lying about that. Take what you've learned, take what you've heard back to your own chapters, build those solutions out from the chapter level. And like Christy said, it begins with you. So this is the end of day 1 of National Leadership Academy with NAP. Hope you all enjoyed that. We will go back into day 2 tomorrow. In order to go back to our main room for the closing remarks, please use the link in the chat. And Judy, thank you so much. As always, you are a pleasure to work with.
Thank you. I'm just do one more. It's just a plug. I'm doing complimentary webinars every month and really creating talking circles to talk about advancement issues for professionals of color. And so it's the third Thursday of every single month. It's free and one can just show up. So if you're interested, I have my email in the chat. Feel free just to email me and I'll put you on the list to be invited. Let's keep going. We can make it happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you all for all that you're doing on behalf of all Asians in the United States. Take good care. Enjoy your Leadership Academy.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Judy.
Harris, for the invitation. All right.
Absolutely. We'll be in touch, Judy. I want you to get to speak at more of these.
We'll
pay you. Raven, we'll pay her.
Issue anymore. All right. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Happy New Year to everyone too. All right. Take care. Bye.